Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Week 4 Reactions Roundtable here on FantasyInsiders.com. My name is Davis Mattek. I am joined by Ben Gretch, who you can find on Twitter at YardsPerGretch, and our good friend Josh, who you can find at Fantasy ADHD. We are here to recap some of the action from Week 4, talk about some surprises, discuss the returning players from suspension, and hopefully give out some waiver wire advice as well, though it actually does look like the waiver wire is kind of bare. There's certainly, since Gio Bernard in Week 3 has not been anyone worth a significant share of your FAAB dollars. Gretch, what was most surprising to you from the Week 4 action?
I don't know if I would call it most surprising, but I think one of the biggest storylines for me was I thought both Baker Mayfield and Josh Rosen played really well. I think both experienced a ton of they didn't get a lot of help. They both had a lot of drops throughout the day. If you watch those games, Cleveland dropped probably 6 or 7 passes. I mean, Antonio Callaway had a really rough day. Baker missed him on a deep throw early, which was definitely on Baker. He had a potential 50-yard touchdown. Baker overshot him. But Callaway was dropping like bubble screens and some short passes. And Njoku dropped a relatively easy pass up the seam. And then if you watched the Cardinals and Seattle game, Rosen put some balls on some guys that he wasn't getting a ton of help with either, especially some balls that he pushed down the field. So I was really impressed by both the rookies this week, making their debuts, the two.
What about you, Josh? What really leapt out to you in terms of either team or individual performance in Week 4?
You know, that for the team side, I was really pleasantly surprised to see Chicago's keep their foot on the gas against Tampa Bay. I continue to be shocked throughout that game that Jordan Howard wasn't getting more work despite the fact that they had such a large lead so early in that game. And they just continued going back to Tarik Cohen. They kept just destroying that defense the way that it needs to be destroyed right now from the slot. And it's just really good to see Chicago just stick with being aggressive and keep trying to score, not sitting on a lead the way that so many other teams have.
I mean, just mind-blowing tilt for me. Jordan Howard is probably one of my highest-owned players, both in weekly management and in best ball. I basically assumed that if Y plus X equals Z in terms of Nagy being better, Trubisky playing competently, that Z would equal Jordan Howard having a great fantasy season, but it really has not been the case. They have not scored very much on the ground. Trey Burton has really been the target of all their scripted drives. If you look at what they've done in each of the 4 games, Burton was heavily involved on all of their scripted drives in the first quarter in the red zone. Tarik Cohen had not been much of a threat, but was much more so actually out-carrying and out-targeting Howard for the first time this year in that Week 4 game. So I'm officially pressing the panic button on Jordan Howard, because if he's not going to get the goal line work, if he's not going to get the icing the clock work when they win by 30 points, Gretch, I mean, what is even the point of Jordan Howard?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's definitely a concern. It was one game, and it felt like it was kind of game plan dependent. I mean, it was really weird to see the first half usage. Cohen had, I think, 18 touches in the first half to Howard having 3. And yet it continued into the second half a little bit. I didn't actually see the touch counts in the second half quite yet, but yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if we should completely panic based on that one game because Cohen hadn't been as involved, and whether or not that was just kind of one game. But on the flip side of that, you can say, well, look, it worked really, really well.
That's the thing is Nagy's a sharp guy, and he's going to look at that game and he's going to be like, the Buccaneers defense had no clue what we were going to do on any play. There was not one segment where Trubisky looked lost, where he looked hurried, where anyone on offense didn't look like, oh, okay, we're just going to go and score points.
And Cohen's an amazing athlete, was definitely a target for, zero running back type drafters, as a guy who just has inherent upside, like Chris Thompson type upside, if he could be very involved in the passing game like we saw. And, he was used kind of sporadically by John Fox last year. His usage hasn't been great early on, and now in Week 4, he gets used really heavily. And it looks like if he's going to continue to get this type of usage, he showed that explosiveness last year too. I mean, he's definitely somebody to target if he's on your waiver wire, especially in PPR leagues. I mean, to both of our point right just now, Nagy's going to use him. He opens up the offense entirely. He's way more dynamic for that type of offense than Jordan Howard.
In that same vein, Josh, do you think that there is any value long-term? Would you be using Taylor Gabriel as a starter after seeing, he also was, the recipient of several design plays. They had the play on the goal line where Chase Daniel was in there at running back, a confusing look that was clearly designed just to get Gabriel the ball.
Yeah, I'm going to be hesitant with Gabriel as like an every week guy, but if I think the matchup is right and I think he has a high ceiling potential, I'm certainly an advocate of playing him. And I think you mentioned the right way to think about Gabriel in that they have to scheme him the ball. And that happened in Atlanta under Shanahan. They schemed Gabriel the ball. So the fact that they're doing it again in Chicago, I mean, it's good in that they're actively trying to get him the ball. I think it's dependable volume. I don't. I think the matchup's going to have to be right.
I think that's probably fair. Someone who I'm now officially buying in on. Oh, go ahead, Ben.
I want to actually jump in because I wrote about Gabriel last week in Stealing Signals and said that the signal was that he was kind of their number 2 option in their offense. So I'm going to go a little bit different way on this. Like, they've been giving him some air yards. He's been second on the team in targets. I actually aggressively added him across almost all my seasonal leagues last week. I did not make the decision to start him in any leagues, so I can't really take so much props about this explosion, but his usage has been pretty consistent. And I think a lot of people really love Trey Burton, and in particular people looked at the contract, said they gave him $18 million guaranteed. They're going to make him a part of their offense. They gave Taylor Gabriel $14 million guaranteed this year. Like, they didn't just give him some tiny contract, and they have been using him even before Anthony Miller got banged up. And yes, Anthony Miller not being out there impacted week 4. But even before he got banged up, Gabriel has been the number 2 option in the offense ahead of Burton in terms of targets and definitely in terms of air yards. So, I mean, to me, I was actually relatively unsurprised about this performance. I mean, I think he has this type of splash potential, and I'm a little bit more ready to say that this could be a real thing and that he could actually be their number 2.
I am also team Gabriel. I think that anytime you have the ability to own the guy in the offense who they're designing plays specifically for him, not just getting his targets in the run of play, that's I would agree with you, a signal like, yeah, this guy is worth owning, this guy is worth starting. The same is true of Sammy Watkins in the Chiefs offense. Actually, I think if we redrafted right now, and preseason didn't happen, if you did drafts without the knowledge of preseason, I think Watkins would be a 4th round pick because he was really bad in the preseason, just not involved. But through 3 weeks, we're recording this before the Monday Night Football game, he has actually been the most consistently used player in terms of being put in motion, being lined up outside, inside, in the backfield. They have not done as much to get Tyreek Hill involved. Another player who is involved in their offense in a way I did not expect based on preseason usage was Nyheim Hines. Marlon Mack's injury opened up room in that backfield for someone to catch passes, but basically what's happened is Indianapolis, they're just done running the ball.
Yep.
I believe that Jordan Wilkins had 6 carries for 16 yards. Jordan Wilkins is droppable now, as is Marlon Mack. The only Colts backfield worth starting in a 12-team PPR league is Nyheim Hines. There are going to be some weeks where he only gets 4 points just because low pace or weird game script or whatever. But the Colts have a defense that started out strong and is now allowing a bunch of plays, allowing more yards per attempt, gave up 37 points in the overtime game yesterday. Hines is going to be the guy that works well with what they're doing with Luck now, which is really every play there's a read at 5 yards. And if that read at 5 yards is open, Luck is just taking it. He's not pushing the ball down the field. And a weird sequence of events that actually adds more value to Hines is Hilton's injury because it gives him more potential to be the move guy, the guy who's lined up in the slot, the guy who's moving around before the snap. Because I don't think Ryan Grant can do that. I know Chester Rogers can't do that. And the Jack Doyle injury also is a pretty big benefit for him. I honestly think Hines is kind of RB23 in PPR now. That's about where I would rank him, I think, Ben.
Yeah, I think that's that's definitely aggressive, but I don't think it's wrong. I mean, I think you're right. And he's another guy I wrote about in Stealing Signals last week because he played a 73% snap share in relatively neutral script the week before, and it was exactly what you said. I mean, they just didn't run the ball. This week, they were in negative script. They were behind quite a bit against Houston and chasing and were able to force overtime, but Hines played 69% snaps again. So he went from 73% to 69%. The last 2 weeks, he's playing like an RB1 in terms of snap share, but obviously he's not a heavy running player. Again, we just talked about this with Tariq Cohen, having the type of Chris Thompson splash potential. These types of players are going to be way more – like these are the guys you want to be on before people realize how viable they are in fantasy, because people still love the traditional running back. But as offenses get way more spread, they're willing to be shotgun way more frequently and throw way, way more and just abandon the run entirely. And especially with Luck, who is not pushing the ball down the field a bunch. He did push it down the field more in week 4, which was nice to see. But he's going to rack up attempts because they're not going to have these big chunk plays. Hines, I mean, he ended up catching a ton of passes. A few of those were splashy. A couple of them were just like no-yard catches. And I know people who hate PPR scoring don't like –
I love a good 1-yard reception.
Right. I love it. I love PPR scoring, and I love, like, I mean, whatever. Like that's the game we play, right? So Hines racked up 9 catches, and then the Chris Thompson upside I'm talking about is essentially a pass catching back who's getting a ton of targets, which is what Cohen saw and Hines saw, and has at least some touchdown equity. Both those guys scored this week. Hines obviously scored twice, and we know Luck loves to target his running backs, dating back to, Ahmad Bradshaw in the red zone. So these are guys who have high target ceilings in the right script and in the right situation, and for Cohen, apparently in any script, and also have the red zone viability. And their touch counts might not be high, which might make them scary, but that's basically what Alvin Kamara is too. I mean, Kamara's been getting way more rush attempts this year with Ingram out, but that's how you rack up PPR points. That's how you have a decent floor and a high ceiling, is racking up catches and getting the red zone points or red zone touches. Between the 20s rush attempts that none of these guys that we're talking about are getting a lot of, other than Kamara, I guess. Those aren't even really that valuable of touches for fantasy football and PPR leagues especially. So the fact that Hines had 4 carries this week and wasn't really doing much between the 20s, that doesn't matter. What matters is he's very involved in the passing game and was involved in the red zone.
Do you have a significant thought on Hines, Josh?
Well, my only significant thought is I regret not using him in DFS yesterday over Bilal Powell, but it was the same reasoning. It was a game script reasoning, and the fact that they are the primary pass catching back and their offenses that should be behind frequently. The positive thing I see about Hines is that outside of the Washington game, where Indianapolis had to lead the entire game, his usage has been high, his snap count has been high. And I don't see any change in that going forward. Indianapolis is not going to be icing teams. Like, they're not going to be blowing teams out. So they're going to be forced to throw the ball more, the way you two guys have mentioned. And I think his target ceiling is going to be super high. I mean, we could see him eclipse 100 targets this year based on the usage we've had through 4 games.
You want to talk about tilt? I did use Hines in DFS, and I was top 5 in a single entry. I threw Hines in a single entry lineup with a Watson stack, and Kamara's late touchdown run dropped me to like 40th.
We were probably in the same contest because I had Kamara with the Watson stack and is my main GPP team, and it was a pretty good day. Yeah. But that actually brings up another guy I wanted to talk about. I'm adding Keke Coutee in probably not 12-team leagues, but definitely I'm in a couple 14-team leagues, and maybe even I'm in this super competitive Roto World 12-team league where it's just like everyone's good and there's all the bad players on the waiver wire, all the good players are on rosters, and he had the largest target share of any wide receiver going yesterday, and he was like a legit prospect, played with Mahomes at Texas Tech. Do you have any thoughts on the Texans passing game integrating a third wide receiver for the first time really under the Bill O'Brien era, Josh?
I don't know if I have too many thoughts on it. I mean, the drumbeat for QT has been rolling since the draft, really. Since they brought him in, a lot of folks thought he was an excellent prospect for the NFL because of his skill set, and it was nice to see Houston finally roll him out and give him some usage yesterday, especially with Fuller, Ailing, and Bruce Ellington being done for the year. It's a lot of times we just look for opportunity to come from either injury or lack of performance. So QT, I think we could certainly look at him if Fuller's going to miss any time. I think it certainly amplifies his value because he'll effectively step into like the number 2 receiving role in the offense. Otherwise, I think he's a weekly play at this point. Houston's playing shootouts right now because their defense, while they still have some teeth to their pass rush, they're getting scored on. And their offense is sloppy enough to where they have to pass a lot. So I think,
yeah, and they just generate no push with how bad that offensive line is. And even though the coaches in Texas, they do skew a little bit more conservative, they still are not making. They're still not pounding Lamar Miller into the line for 1.8 yards per carry. Let's talk about some of these guys returning from suspension. Ben, thoughts on what Julian Edelman will be going forward? I would say I'm probably going to be the lowest out of the three of us on Edelman returning.
Oh, I'm high on him, so you won't have me going lower than you. I mean, I think they need help at receiver. They obviously brought in Gordon and they tried to integrate him right away. Brady really seems to want Gordon to work, but he's not like if their whole passing game starts functioning more, and I think if Gordon gets integrated and actually hits, it will start functioning more. I don't think that Gordon and Edelman are necessarily going to be like competing for targets. It would end up being something similar to what we've seen from the Lions or we've seen from the Patriots in the past, where Edelman's basically the Golden Tate role and Gordon could be what Kenny Galladay's been, down the field, and Hogan could still be what Marvin Jones has been. I don't think Philip Dorsett's in a great spot, but you would expect to see this Patriots passing offense continue to get better. The chief difference is that obviously James White has been extremely involved, but I think that's been more out of necessity. We've seen that happen throughout, his time in New England, where at periods where they've had injuries or haven't had a lot of targets, Brady will lean on White, and White will have the types of games that he's been having lately. But I do think they don't want to have their primary receiver be out of the backfield. And he led the team with 10 targets this week again. You want to see them be able to push the ball vertically down the field. I think they want to be able to do that. So if you have Gronk and you have Gordon and you have Hogan and then Edelman and White are going to kind of compete for the shorter targets, I think Edelman can step in and start to get plenty of targets right away and be a reliable mid-range target. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of options there, but and White is a concern in the short area of the field, but I do think a lot of those targets are going to shift back to Edelman.
A big concern that I have is that it's shown to be statistically significant that players returning from PED suspensions oftentimes have a drop in efficiency. And there's not a ton of room for Edelman to get less efficient because he already plays a really inefficient position just in general. And so if, he drops a couple more passes per game, if he's not quite as crisp, what Edelman runs is timing routes, and his timing has to be really good, especially because Brady at this stage in his career, he's not keeping plays alive. We actually didn't see this at all in the Dolphins game, but in the Lions game, when that offense got off the schedule, they just folded. Brady was, throwing the ball to his receivers' ankles. He was taking bad sacks. He was getting hurried. And I think that there is some real significant downside, not only returning from the PED suspension, but any loss of short area agility for Edelman is going to be huge because that's really all that he ever offered in terms of like a plus skill. Edelman, within like 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, was probably one of the most dynamic players in like all of football. And if he loses that combination of the PEDs, combination of the ACL tear, I think there's real risk that he's like a 7.5 target per game player, which sounds like a lot when you say it. But when you realize that Edelman's like previously great fantasy seasons came when he was seeing like 9 targets a game, I think that is a meaningful difference. Josh, do you think that this does anything to impact Gronkowski's outlook? Just that there's another player that opposing defenses have to pay attention to on the interior of the field? Because as of right now, that's not true. Everything the defenses are doing is basically taking away Gronk and forcing Brady to try and throw outside where he is not as efficient.
I think I like your point about concern about his short area agility. I kind of share it with you. If he's coming off a PED suspension, I have some concerns about his ability to play the game.
Should just be noted, I hate Julian Edelman, so there's a real possibility that I am not being unbiased here. I've never owned him. I would never draft him. I thought his ADP this offseason was one of the most outrageous. Like, I thought his ADP in like the 5th round was as bad as Des Bryant's in the 12th round.
I agree with that, actually. I think that's a very fine take to have. It's going to depend. Like, I think initially Gronk is going to get more opportunity out of it because teams will fear Edelman as if he's the old Edelman. And I think they will try to cover him as if he's the old Edelman. And if he's not, then we'll see. I think we'll see defenses start to blanket Gronk again and dare the Patriots to beat them with their other receivers like they have so far. But we might get a 1 or 2 week cushion where Gronk could be the old Gronk because some coverage is being drawn away from him.
I am just I am tilted off of my face that Gronkowski is so bad. I have so many fantasy teams that would be good if Gronkowski was putting up Trey Burton's numbers, but like the fact that Gronkowski is getting me like Tyler Kroft level numbers is just insane tilt. Do you have teams that are being submarined by Gronk right now, Gretch?
Yep. Yeah, I have Gronk in a lot of spots, and I'm not that concerned. I mean, it's an issue because tight ends are I'm not that concerned because tight ends aren't really scoring across the board. So he still has room to be this differentiator and this big asset if he starts to hit on some big weeks. But it's obviously not ideal that, spending a top flight pick on a position where really no one's getting a ton of production other than, I guess, Kelsey and Ertz are still being pretty solid. But there's just a lot of kind of up and down. I mean, we saw more production from the middle class of the tight ends this week. I mean, Eifert scored before he got hurt. Burton scored.
R.I.P. in peace, Tyler Eifert.
Right. Kittle had a long touchdown. I mean, there was a lot of guys who actually – Jimmy Graham scored. These guys actually got on the board a little bit this week. It would be nice to see Gronk do something, but I think that'll come. But just to circle back to your Edelman point, I think you guys are potentially right. I mean, I know you're right about the PED and study that's been done, but I think we'll know real quick if he still has kind of that burst basically in week.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll probably know literally this week. So week 5, they are playing the Thursday night game against the Colts, and I think you'll probably know by halftime if you did the right thing by holding Edelman this time or not.
And I think there's an argument with his huge target share throughout his career. I think there's an argument that it's worth the risk before we see this. And that'd be my side of it, but.
I would actually go the other way with if I had Edelman right now or if I could acquire him cheaply, I still would, even though in my current position, no Edelman, didn't take him in best balls, don't have him on any of my teams. If the cost relative to what the draft was, so if you're getting him for less than the equivalent of like a 6th round draft pick, I would totally buy. Whereas if I had Ingram, I would actually be selling for a couple reasons. One, the Saints offense, despite these gaudy point totals that they've put up a couple times, I think is not as good as it was last season. And also, I think Kamara is just so good that I don't necessarily think that Ingram is going to have the per-game efficiency that he had last season, especially the targets. Maybe he retains the goal line work, but people kind of forget that a lot of what Ingram was doing last year, he was also being successful as a receiver. Ben, what's your official stance on Ingram returning from suspension?
No, I think I agree. I mean, I think Kamara is obviously going to be the lead. Back in the preseason, I was really interested in their usage because they had brought on so many running backs in the offseason, right? And in the very first preseason game, Kamara started. Ingram entered after like 3 snaps, played the first drive. Ingram started the second drive, and only Ingram and Kamara touched the ball. No other back, when they had all these extra guys, Vereen and Terrence West and Jonathan Williams and everyone, no other back came on the field in this preseason game until the 3rd drive. And then the next week, Ingram started. Kamara was out. Ingram started and ran with the first team. So they ended up getting rid of a lot of those backs as well. So to me, it signifies, and especially the way they've used the offense so far, it's been so heavily run through Kamara and Thomas. To me, it signifies that they do think that Ingram is going to, I think Ingram's going to come back and be the third cog in this offense. He probably won't be as productive as Kamara and Thomas. It's hard to say that when those two guys have been so otherworldly so far. But I think they'll use him, and I think they'll use him in the passing game, and I think he'll have the same role as last year. I'm excited for him to return personally.
I do think if you wanted to take a little signal, you would see that Taysom Hill being involved in these red zone plays yesterday is kind of like, we just need someone who can put the shoulder in and get 4 yards.
I was literally watching that thinking in my head, like, Sean Payton's going to pull Taysom Hill aside this week and be like, dude, you did awesome. Really appreciate all, everything you did, but we're not going to be using those packages anymore. We don't need it anymore.
What a unique player, man. Taysom Hill, the rare quarterback who plays special teams.
Yeah, he's sweet. He's sweet, but I don't expect that to continue when Ingram's back. And so, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah, that was my main curiosity was the Taysom Hill usage yesterday. I saw he got 4 touches through a couple passes. I think it's possible they'll keep him in there for these packages on the goal line.
I hope
and just
so.
Integrate Ingram into it. That makes the most sense.
Yeah, they might do it a little bit still. It's been so successful. There's no they wouldn't need to just run away from it entirely.
So we're nearing the end here. We've done a lot of academic conversation, but I want to go ahead and get some official waiver wire bids, some moves you guys are looking to make. Honestly, the main situation to me is I think CJ Uzoma, who has ran 3 times the routes that Tyler Kroft has so far, is actually a very solid ad in 12-team leagues and up. I think as he has potential to be even more than a streamer. That Eifert position, obviously super valuable. Andy Dalton playing the best football of his career. Bill Lazor looks like a real quality NFL GM. Chances that CJ Uzoma is a top 12 tight end from week 5 onward, Josh?
Oh, man. I think it's pretty low personally. I'd say maybe 20% chance, 15 to 20% chance, given just how wild the tight end position has been again this year. But it's still a chance. I mean, that offense uses the tight end pretty frequently, so I don't see any reason to say it's a 0.
Yeah, I was going to say like 25 to 30%, and the reasoning would be your point. He's been running a ton of routes, and he's going to play big snaps. But at the same time, they have a ton of options. Tyler Boyd is broken out. Ross scored this week. We'll see if he gets going, but obviously they have A.J. Green and Gio.
He also immediately pulled up lame.
Right. Yeah.
It feels very bad to say to you, president of the John Ross fan club, but Tyler Boyd is just dunking on him. John Ross is not going to be a thing this year.
I'm not denying Tyler Boyd dunking on him, but John Ross can still play, and
he'll get like 8 touchdowns, and like 6 of those weeks will be usable in best ball probably because he is still super fast.
Right, and but you're right. I never at any point have said Tyler Boyd isn't good. I think Tyler Boyd is extremely good. He was an extremely good prospect. I still have him in some dynasty leagues. I held him, even as he was like useless for 2 years, essentially. And I
wish I had your faith. I was like a big Tyler Boyd prospect guy, and then last year happened, and I was just like, this dude can't beat out Brandon LaFell. He's useless.
Right. It is kind of weird that he's finally hitting his potential that we knew was there after as bad as he was last year. But he's confirmed good as well. So that's like those guys I think would be not ideal for Uzama. It's not like there's a ton of opportunity in this passing game right now.
I would say my number one waiver wire strategy right now, and this is not meant tongue-in-cheek, I'm actually doing this in my leagues that have FAAB. If the defense that plays the Buffalo Bills is on your waiver wire, 10% of your FAAB budget minimum, not joking, I put 12% of my FAAB bid on the Packers in my main home league this last weekend, won them. I plan on putting 10% on the Titans again this week. I already added the
Titans in one league for next week.
This is not a joking strategy. This is a real way to get an edge on your league because I think a lot of people, so definitely in more casual leagues, they don't spend FAAB on defenses, tight ends, or quarterbacks. It's just running backs and wide receivers, and then they wait for first come, first serve waivers to hit. So definitely defense. Josh Allen is on pace to lose 657 yards for sacks this season. Kirk Cousins led the NFL with 350 yards lost on sacks in 2017. Like, Allen certainly, I believe, does have a ceiling, but his worst play is so bad that it's like unbelievable.
Yeah,
and the Bills are not an NFL offense.
Dude, I'm doing the same thing. I bid $57 and $1,000 budget last week to get the Packers in a league, and then I immediately cut Philip Dorsett, who obviously had a decent week, but I think his role is going to diminish in free agency on like Saturday, and I picked up the Titans so that next week, after I don't want to use the Packers again because they go at Detroit, I can use the Titans next week. So, you don't usually want to carry 2 DSTs, but I actually agree. Like, if you're playing in defense special teams leagues, you can get a pretty significant edge right now by like planning ahead a little bit.
I mean, drop Robbie Anderson for a second defense, as much as that pains me to say. Like, the Jets just aren't going to throw the ball deep. That's a situation I'm in like 4 leagues. Like, it's just not happening for Robbie. Get someone else.
Yeah, and I'd say if you want to roll with that strategy, I really like it. You might want to have a backup in mind. I think the backup should be whichever defense is facing Arizona right now.
Yeah, Rosen does look like he's going to take some sacks. It looks like he's just going to kind of keep plays alive, which is like a good NFL quarterbacking skill. But in terms of guys you play against in fantasy, it looks like he will he will definitely extend plays longer than Sam Bradford did.
Yes.
I can say that much.
Absolutely.
Closing words of wisdom, Josh.
We talked about Nyheim Hines. I think Darren Sproles is another player to target on waiver wires. If you want a similar player arbitrage play, you could get him a lot cheaper right now. And I think once he's healthy again, the Philadelphia offense will integrate him just like they did in week 1 against Atlanta. High target potential.
Someone you're trying to sell in 12-team PPR leagues if you have them, Ben?
Someone I'm trying to sell. I mean, the first guy that comes to mind is Calvin Ridley. Everyone's going to say to sell him,
yes.
And I don't have him anywhere, so that's not even that great of advice. I can't even remember who I was trying to ditch in the last couple of weeks right off the top.
I would sell Nelson Aguilar if you can find someone who buys the target share, because Nelson Aguilar, his line for touchdowns the rest of the year, I'm going to set it at 2.5 and would probably take the under. Alshon Jeffrey is in that offense to score touchdowns, and Dallas Goedert is coming along way faster than I think anyone in the fantasy community project. Like there's a real
and Jordan Matthews. I mean,
yeah, Nelson Aguilar could be like the 4th option in Philadelphia, like starting next week.
He's not going to be the 4th option. He's been very good over the last couple of years, but it is going to get crowded. I'll agree with that.
I mean, I think there is a non-zero chance that Dallas Goedert scores more fantasy points the rest of the way than Nelson Aguilar, not even being glib.
Okay.
Like if Goddard scores 7 touchdowns and Aguilar scores 2 the rest of the way, which is, I mean, that's probably 10th percentile outcomes for both of them, either 90th and 10th both of the way, but certainly something that could happen, that Aguilar has to catch like 40 passes to make up that difference, which certainly could happen. But I think that.
But if you're saying 90th percentile and 10th percentile and they both have to happen, that's a 1% chance of happening. So.
I'm not a Nelson Aguilar guy.
I know. I can tell.
I'm like 0% on that. Like the usage for 3 weeks while Alshon was not with the team, I think sure that's fine. Alshon's like what a real wide receiver 1 looks like though, and I think that when you get that guy on the field and the play is breaking down and Wentz is scrambling, which he is really good at, Alshon is the dude who's going to be open, not Aguilar. That's an official Mattek brand take.
All right. I'm sure it'll be in Mattek's stock up, stock down article this week. So you got to check.
There you go. Everyone make sure to check out fantasyinsiders.com. Have a lot of great data visualization tools that Josh does proprietary to fantasyinsiders.com. Stealing signals from Ben is featured on fantasyinsiders.com. My weekly stock up, stock down report is on fantasyinsiders.com. And we will see you guys back next week.